Hello and welcome to Cole Red Plays Raid Shadow Legends. I am Cole Red. Thank you for being here today. In today's video, we are going to cover how to build an arena nuker. Now, the good news is you won't have to worry about whether your arena nuker is an attack-based champion, a defensive-based champion, or an HP-based champion, because this method is going to work for all types of champions. However, remember, every single nuker has differences in their kits. So there may be tactical differences that you're going to need to understand in order to get the optimal usage out of your particular nuker. All right, but this video is going to give you a good starting point to start improving how you build your arena nuker and getting more effective use of those nukers. Just so you know, the reason I'm doing this video today is because over the weekend there was a 2x Void Shard event, and I was reading the comments of my videos from the weekend, and I found out that several of my viewers, several of you out there, hit on really good arena nukers this weekend. I know there was at least one Leorius the Proud, who is like maybe the number one or number two arena nuker in the game from my standpoint, at least. And then I also know that there was at least one Genbo the Dishonored and one Skull Crown. Both are great Void epics that are fantastic arena nukers. In fact, my own arena nuker is Genbo the Dishonored. So I'm going to be using Genbo as the example today, but this method will work for other champions, a lot of other champions, like I said, regardless of what their damage stat is, and also regardless of whether they're a rare, an epic, or a legendary. You can even use this method to specialize your starter champion as your arena nuker, if that would be a good decision for you, depending on where you are in your account and what kind of roster you have. Okay, so let's jump into the method of building the nuker right away. We're going to go take a look at Genbo. Here I am in my roster. Here's my Genbo. You can see my build. I'll go over the build in a second. But before you even get started with your build, you need to understand where your champions are getting their damage from. So the first thing that we do here is we look up in the upper right-hand corner. We can see this is an attack-based champion. But that's not really enough information because sometimes that's a little bit misleading. So what you actually want to do is you want to click on the Skills tab, and you want to start looking at your damage skills. I'm going to click on the A1, and you can see down here at the bottom of the description, it says damage based on, and then in these green brackets, it says attack. So what I know is 100% of the damage of this skill is calculated based on the attack value that Genbo has in his kit. If I look at the A2, it's also based on attack. Now, the reason I have to check every skill is because for some champions, this may be different. I'm going to show you. My original arena nuker was actually Padma back in the day. This was like the first few months of my account. She's not a phenomenal arena nuker, but she did a good job for a while. But one of the things about this champion is you can see when I click on her A1, this skill has damage based on defense and attack. Okay, so even though up here in the right-hand corner it says defense, Padma actually gets some value out of attack. Now, the thing you should know about champions that have multiple damage stats is that the first stat listed is the primary damage stat. The second stat listed is the secondary stat. It's not going to add as much damage. The nice thing about this particular case is when you build Padma with defense, she not only hits harder, but she gets harder to kill. And then every champion has an attack stat, right? Every champion starts with at least a base attack of, maybe 700, 800, 1,000, whatever it happens to be. Nobody starts with 0 attack. So in this particular case, you're not losing any, or at least you're not losing as much value from the attack set as you would on a purely defense or HP based champion. Another thing is if you look at these other skills, this one is defense and attack, but this third one is only defense. Okay, so again, the primary stat is in play here, and I'm going to get more value out of defense for Padma, but I can still put a little bit of attack in her. So if I have some substat rolls that roll into attack on my gear, it's not a waste here. Okay, so back to Genbo. Now, other than your main attack stat, the most important stats for damage are your crit rate and your crit damage. Now, the way crit rate works is at some percentage of time, you're going to hit a critical hit on your enemy, and that's going to increase your damage. So the amount of increase is based on your crit damage. Now, you will always hit for 100% of your damage. If you just hit a regular hit, you will get 100% of your damage unless you weak hit. We'll talk about that in a second. But for regular hits, you will just get your normal damage. When you crit hit, you will get that damage plus whatever percentage you have in your crit damage. So let's say I start at the base of 60%. What that means is on a critical hit, I would get my normal hit, plus I would get 60% bonus damage. So I would hit for 1.6 times my original hit, basically. Okay, so by pumping this damage, if I'm at a total stat, let's see here. My total stat is 311%. I'm actually adding the 100% that is the normal to that, and my final damage will be 411% of a regular hit. Okay, so that's the way to know like what crit damage does. Now, you do want 100% effective crit rate on any nuker, whether it's a PvE nuker or a PvP nuker. And the reason I'm calling it effective crit rate is because it only matters what the crit rate is while you're in the battle that you're fighting. It doesn't actually matter as much what the number is out here in the build. Okay, so you can see I only have 75% crit rate on Genbo. Now, the reason I've only built him with 75% is because he has a skill, his A3, that increases crit rate by 30%. It also then grants an extra turn. So what I can do is I can open with this skill, and at least on his first nuke and probably his second hit as well, he's going to have 105% crit rate. Now, I'm throwing away 5% there, but that's because I rebuilt him and I was a little bit inefficient, but I wanted to increase his damage. So you're hoping for exactly 100%, but if you go over a little bit, that's better than being under a little bit. It's way better to be over 5% than under 5%. Now, if you have a champion that doesn't bring a crit rate buff, most of them don't, you can supply this buff with a support champion. So there are support champions that bring in increased crit rate. So you could consider that, and that will allow you to build your arena nuker with 70% crit rate. If you don't have that buff available, don't worry. All you have to do is make sure that your gear supplies enough crit rate to get your champion to 100% crit rate. Now, even if you are at 100% crit rate, you can potentially weak hit on affinity champions. Okay, so the nice thing about a Void Epic is there is no weak affinity. So you will always get your crit rate. You'll never weak hit. However, if you have an affinity-based nuker, like Magnar here, you can see my Magnar is not built, but if you are using Magnar, he is a very good arena nuker. But there is one additional consideration, which is that he is spirit affinity. So he will weak hit at a 30% rate against magic affinity targets. And a weak hit is weaker than a regular hit. So obviously it is not a crit hit. And no amount of crit rate will overcome that. You can't add 30% crit rate to like overcome the weak hit chance. You will just weak hit 30% of the time. There is an armor set that actually reduces that by 50%. So you will weak hit 15% of the time. But most of the time you're not going to use that armor set. But let's get back to Genbo and talk more about the main damage stats. Okay, so as you can tell, I can get to 100% effective crit rate on this Genbo with the buff. And now I also have a lot of crit damage. So what you may be thinking is it better to put more attack on a champion or more crit damage on a champion? And that's a good question. And the simple answer is they're both good. Both stats are good and you're going to want both stats. However, if you're looking for the optimal distribution, there is a tool in the community that you can use in order to calculate the perfect distribution of primary damage stat, attack, HP, or defense, and crit damage. So let's go check out that tool right now. All right, so this is the damage efficiency tool from hellhades.com. Hellhades.com is an amazing website. I've mentioned it before. It's really one of the best tools in the Raid Shadow Legends community. So go check it out. I will put a link in the description of this video. All right, so if you're on the website and you are looking for this tool, you can hover your mouse over the Raid Shadow Legends banner here. Go ahead in the second column all the way near the bottom, you're looking for damage efficiency tool. Go ahead and click on that and that'll bring you to this page. Now, all you need to do is enter your champion in the first line and then put in your primary damage value here and then your current critical damage value in the third box. Okay, so remember, primary damage value is that stat that you do damage with. So it could be your attack stat, it could be your defense stat, it could be your HP stat, depending on which nuker you are using. If you haven't built your nuker yet, you can just go ahead and estimate what you think you can kind of reach here and put those numbers in, and this will help you figure out the optimal build. All right, so now I hit calculate, and you'll notice down here, so I put in some fake numbers. These aren't my actual numbers, but I put in some fake numbers, and down here we get a readout. Now this readout is telling me that the critical damage goal for efficiency isn't 220, it's 255%. So based on the amount of attack value I have, I should increase my crit damage by 35% to get the optimal distribution of stats. Now let's say I changed this up and I went the other way and I had a lot more crit value. So let's say I said 320. Now you'll notice what it says is, okay, I'm short on primary stat, and the goal for perfect efficiency would be to add 918 attack. Now, I want you to take this with a grain of salt. This is a very good tool, and it can help you be super efficient in the way that you choose the stats that you want to concentrate on, especially if you're maybe choosing accessories, or you're choosing, like, you're using glyphs to, like, you know, get some more stats on your gear. So if you're doing those kinds of things and you're kind of min-maxing, this is a great tool. But I also want you to realize more primary stat will give you more damage. More crit damage will also give you more damage. So I think of this kind of like when you're driving a car on the highway, there is an optimal speed for fuel efficiency, right? So if you're driving at 58 miles an hour or 61 miles an hour or whatever it is for your car, you're going to get the best fuel efficiency you can possibly get while going relatively fast. But if you want to get there faster, you can just go ahead and drop the hammer and get there faster. It's going to use up more fuel, but you're still going to get there faster. So remember, if you just want more damage, more stats equals more damage. But if you are min-maxing and you're trying to be super efficient with the use of your resources and your gear and your glyphs, then this damage efficiency tool can definitely help you do that. Okay, so now that you understand where the damage comes from, it's going to be a mix of your primary stat, crit rate, and crit damage. We want to talk about how to actually build your champion with the stats based on your gear and accessories, so your artifacts and accessories. I'm not going to go into sets just yet. We'll save that for just a minute. But right now, we're just going to be talking about stats. So one of the things that you'll notice right away is that I build all of my arena nukers with the primary damage stat on the boots. You don't want speed boots, and you don't want flat attack HP or defense boots. You want attack percentage, HP percentage, or defense percentage here based on whatever your primary damage stat is. The reason is this is a huge amount of primary stat. This is really a ton of primary stat. If you can get 6-star boots, great. If you can't, 5-star are fine. You can absolutely get into gold 4 and gold 5 with all 5-star gear. You'll notice that my chest piece, which is also primary damage stat, attack, this is only a 5-piece item, but Genbo will just absolutely slam gold 5 champions. I live in gold 5. I haven't fallen out of it in like over a year. It is really not about getting the absolute best gear as it is about getting the correct gear. Okay, and so I'm going to talk more about that when we talk about sets. But so you'll notice, okay, so primary damage stat here, primary damage stat on the chest, and then the gloves are one of the areas where you have two options, basically. You're going to have a little bit of a flexible option here. So the first thing is, you'll notice I have crit damage gloves here. You eventually want to move to crit damage gloves because this is a source of extra crit damage. However, you still have to hit your 100% effective crit rate. That is more important. So if you can't get enough crit rate just through substats, right, then you need to have a crit damage gauntlet. Now, if you have a crit damage gauntlet here, that's going to allow you to worry less about substat rolls on your other gear, which is also going to create more flexibility in your build. Okay, so eventually you do want to get the crit damage gloves, but if you can't do that right now, that's totally fine. You're still going to be able to get into gold 2, gold 3, maybe even gold 4 with crit damage gloves, depending on the rest of your build. So 100% effective crit rate is more important than extra crit damage at the expense of not being at 100%. As far as the other items are concerned, you primarily are looking for crit rate. A little bit of speed is nice. Crit damage is also nice. Primary damage stat is nice. If you get something like accuracy, you have to decide whether accuracy is needed in your kit. If you get something like resistance is basically a throwaway for most arena nukers, but some arena nukers, especially in a go second team, might get some value out of resist. you don't necessarily want to stack it, but if you get a little bit, you don't have to like reject that piece. As far as the accessories are concerned, your ring should probably be a primary stat ring, so attack if you're attack based. You also want to try to get percentage rolls in your primary attack stat on the ring. If you can also get the flat version as well, so you can get like attack percentage and flat attack on an attack ring, I think that's possible, then that would be optimal. Whatever the other stats are matter less. In this particular case, it would have been better if I chose a ring that had multiple rolls in the attack percentage. But I guess when I rebuilt this champion, I didn't have that available, and so I didn't do it. But I could probably squeeze a little bit more attack onto him now. You see, I have a ton of rings here that I could potentially roll up and get some more attack stat onto my Genbo. Your amulet should be a crit damage amulet almost 100% of the time. It's way, way better than a flat stat amulet. So if you're an attack-based champion, don't get an attack amulet. In fact, what I would tell you is the only champions I would ever use an attack amulet on is a bomb champion. So I usually just throw them out. You know, I just need one or two for my bomb champions in those particular factions. And in every other faction, I just sell attack amulets. Now, you can do what you want to do if you want to hold on to that. If you don't have a crit damage amulet, then in the interim, you could use an attack-based amulet or a defense-based amulet or whatever, just to, you know, have something to put in the slot. But as soon as you get a crit damage amulet, that's the one that should go here. As far as your banner is concerned, you can decide whether you want a flat stat banner or an accuracy banner, depending on your champion. I could get a little bit more damage out of Genbo here with an attack stat banner. So that would be good. However, I do think accuracy works in his kit a little bit with his A1, so that's why I have some accuracy on him. And again, I may not have had an attack banner that had a triple roll into speed. That's really probably the reason I'm using this, because a triple roll is very rare and it can be very useful. Okay, so now let's talk about armor sets. Now, there are a lot of armor sets that could potentially go on an arena nuker and be effective depending on which nuker you have. So I'm going to focus on the basic ones. The flat stat sets, so the offense set, defense set, and life set, are good for beginner players. If you are early, if you are maybe in bronze or silver arena, you can definitely get some more damage out of putting those primary stat sets on your arena nuker. So that's fine to start with. You generally want to avoid lifesteal sets. Okay, so lifesteal, you might have lifesteal on your starter champion because you need that lifesteal in dungeons, or you need it in wave content or something like that. But it doesn't give a lot of value in arena. So if you are specializing in arena champion, you want to get away from lifesteal sets. Unless they just happen to have the best distribution of stats for you, you could always still use it. But you're not looking at lifesteal as an advantageous set for the arena. Once you start getting a little bit more advanced and you get access to more, a larger variety of artifact sets, you're going to start looking to replace those sets with better specialized sets for the arena. Now, one set that works well for every single arena nuker, regardless of build, basically, or regardless of the primary damage stat, is a crit damage set. That's what I actually have here on Genbo. I have 2 crit damage sets. This is not like the premier level, but it is a step up from just flat stat sets. So in this case, each 2 pieces gives me additional 20% crit damage. So you can see I have 40% crit damage based on these 2 sets. I am also running a speed set primarily because of this crit damage gauntlet, not because I necessarily need a ton of extra speed, but you want to keep your speeds close enough that you can't get cut. So what we don't want to have happen is like have all our support champions go and then there be a too big speed gap to the nuker, and then the enemy team goes in that gap and my arena nuker never gets a chance to go. So you're going to need some speed on your arena nuker. And remember, we don't have speed on our boots, which is usually the place you get the largest amount of speed. So having maybe 1 speed set or some speed on your banner, those are good places to get additional speed onto your arena nuker. Also, if you look at my boots, you'll notice I do have a double roll into speed as a substat here. So I'm still getting 18 speed out of my boots, even though they are not speed boots technically, right? Because their main stat is attack. Okay, so this crit damage set is great for basically any arena nuker. However, there are some, even more powerful sets. The primary one that most people want to go for is Savage. Now, one of the things you'll notice here with the Savage set, it is a 4-piece set, but it ignores 25% of the enemy's defense. Ignoring defense is probably the single best way to improve your damage on a nuker, because as you get higher defensive stats, the percentage value of taking off like 25% gets stronger and stronger. So literally, it's also the best way to kill defensive-based champions. So if you come up against a really tanky go second team, maybe they've got an Ultimate Death Knight, maybe they've got a Stultus Dragonbane as their nuker, maybe they've got Valkyrie, who's another great defensive-based champion, or a Helicath, who's a great defensive-based champion. To cut through that level of defense, your best option is to drop enemy defense. Now, obviously, having a debuff that drops enemy defense is going to be very valuable, but also having a nuker who can just ignore some percentage of defense is extremely valuable. So there are actually 2 sets that you have access to. In fact, there are 3 sets you have access to, but early on, you have access to the Savage set through the Fire Knight dungeon, so you could go into Fire Knight and farm Savage sets. There's also another set that is the Cruel set. You get this as a reward from Clan Boss, and the Cruel set ignores 5% of enemy defense for every 2 pieces. So it is a 2-piece set. So you can get up to 15% of ignoring enemy defense here. Now you'll get the most value out of the Cruel set if you put it on an attack-based champion. So I wouldn't highly recommend this for like an HP-based champion or a defensive-based nuker. You basically want to put this on attack-based champions if you can, and you're going to get both primary stat damage and some ignore defense. So this is a good option if you don't have a Savage set, or you can also use 2 pieces of this in addition to a Savage set, and that's going to increase your ignore defense up to 30%. So those are the gear sets that you at least need to know from the beginning as you are progressing through the game. You can do research on other sets that may be available. You'll see stone skin sets used very often. You may see bolster sets, or there are other sets that get used in arena, some of them on the nukers, some of them on the support champions. There are all sorts of things you can do depending on what kind of champion you're using as your arena nuker and what kind of team composition you've built around that nuker. But this will at least get you started on understanding what sets you should maybe be looking for. Okay, now let's move on from artifact sets to masteries. Okay, so there are 3 trees, and we often think of the offense tree as like the attack tree, the defensive tree as the defense tree, and maybe the support tree as like maybe even like the HP-based tree. But for damage dealers, that's not true. All damage dealers want to specialize in the offense tree. Okay, offense doesn't mean attack stat, it means damage. So they really could call this mastery tree the damage tree. It's not just offense, it's damage. Okay, now the first mastery that you're probably going to want on every damage dealer in the game, whether they're PvE or PvP, is Deadly Precision. This increases your crit rate by 5%. Okay, so this is a free 5% crit rate that allows you to maybe get a little bit more flexibility into your build. It makes you like able to get to 100% crit rate a little bit easier. And sometimes that 5% is really important. It can get you from, 97% to 102, and that's a huge difference. So this is almost always the mastery you want to choose for every damage dealer. And if you go over 100%, you would rather take that out of your kit than take that out of your mastery in most cases. The other mastery here on this tier actually just gives you 75 attack. Obviously, this isn't useful for defensive-based champions or HP-based champions. You could potentially, like I could swap this on my Genbo because I'm at 105% crit rate, so I'd actually get a little bit of damage out of this. But in general, like I said, you'd rather take crit rate out of your kit than swap this mastery. Okay, now on the next tier, there are a few options. The first option here is actually pretty good. Increases damage inflicted by 5% when attacking with full HP. So if you are on a go first team, your nuker is always going to be attacking with full HP, hopefully, if you win the speed race. And so you can get an extra 5% damage over the top. So this is a very good one to take. I haven't taken that on Genbo, but it is a good option. The second one here is crit damage of 10%. I say this is probably mandatory. It should go on every single arena nuker. So this is the one that pretty much everybody's going to take, meaning you can only choose one of the other options. The option I've chosen on Genbo is Shield Breaker, increases damage inflicted to targets under shield buffs by 25%. So it's becoming more and more common to see the enemy team in a shield set or a bolster set, or with a champion who has like a passive shield that the entire team spawns in with, like a Krisk, who gives that. There are a couple other champions who do that. And so this just sort of mitigates the effect, like the benefit of that shield on the enemy by doing more damage to enemies under shield buffs. Finally, you could also choose increases damage inflicted by 5% when attacking with 50% HP or less. I mentioned Leorius at the top of this video. This is actually a pretty good option for Leorius or other champions that would be on a go second team and expect to have less than 50% HP when it was their turn. Okay, so if you know that you're going to get hit first and you're on a go second team, this becomes a good option for that scenario. If you're going on a go first team, your nuker is going to have more than 50% HP, and this is a throwaway mastery. So don't do that for a go first nuker. On the next tier, there are only really 3 options you need to worry about. The first one is increases damage inflicted to targets with less than 40% HP by 8%. This is actually generally good for teams that whittle down the enemy. It can also be good against defensive-based arena teams that have like tough enemies to kill out, you know, so like to like get off the board. So if you're trying to like close out a Duchess, if you're trying to close out an Ultimate Death Knight and just get them off the board, they can survive with low HP for a long time because they get shields, they have regeneration sets, they might get veils. There's all sorts of stuff that can like keep a tricky champion alive. So this one lets you or helps you kill those champions off when they're low health. I basically picked this one because of Ultimate Death Knight and Duchess, so that's why I mentioned those champions, but it is helpful for that reason. We're going to skip over this one here and go to Whirlwind of Death. This increases speed by 6 for each enemy killed by this champion, and that stacks across each round, up to a total of 18 additional speed. So if you know that your battles are likely to go multiple turns, maybe you have a single target nuker like a Rotos. If you have a single target nuker, then you're going to take several turns to kill the enemy, but each time you kill one enemy, you can get faster. And that means it's more likely that you'll, pick up speed and the enemy won't be able to interrupt you as much. And then you can, be more effective as a single target nuker. So this is primarily for single target nukers. AoE nukers are trying to kill the whole enemy team in one shot. And so you're not going to get much value out of Whirlwind of Death. So because I'm using an AoE nuker, I have chosen Ruthless Ambush. This increases the damage inflicted by 8% for the first hit on each enemy. And like I'm saying, I'm trying to one-shot the enemy team. So my first nuke will hit very hard. Now, if I go multiple turns, I actually lose damage on, future hits because I lose the effect of this mastery. But for a one-shot, if you are trying to one-shot the enemy team, this is the best mastery in the entire tree for that purpose, at least until the final tier. Okay, tier 4. All right, so Bring It Down increases damage inflicted by 6% when attacking targets with higher max HP. Do not use this mastery on an HP-based nuker. Okay, so if you are running Magnar or another HP-based nuker, do not use this mastery because you're going to have a big HP pool. Attack-based champions generally have a small HP pool, and you're not going to be putting HP on them, so you can get more value out of this on like a Genbo or a Skullcrown. Okay, now for a defensive-based champion, it's about 50-50. It's not uncommon for us to put some HP on a defensive-based champion. We definitely aren't trying to exclude that stat. So what I would say is be cautious if you're putting this on a defensive-based champion. Make sure that you can keep the HP pool low. If you can't, you're better off with some other masteries. The second option here is Wrath of the Slain. Increases damage inflicted by 5% for each dead ally, stacks up to 10%. This can be especially good on a go second nuker, maybe one who either works on a revive team or one that works on like an unkillable buff. So you might be able to use this for Leorius the Proud and Skullcrown or anybody else with an unkillable buff, because the whole team could get wiped out, but you don't die, or your nuker doesn't die, because you have that buff, and that means you're going to do more damage when you finally get your turn. But it is primarily only used in teams that are either go second teams or fights that last multiple rounds. The third option here is Cycle of Violence. That's the one I've chosen. Has a 30% chance of decreasing the cooldown of a random skill by 1 turn if the damage inflicted by a skill exceeds 30% of the target's max HP. This is actually probably a little bit better on PvE nukers because those fights go a little bit longer. So if you are in wave content, this has a chance of decreasing your cooldowns because it's likely that only your strong nukers are going to be able to take 30% of a target's max HP off of them. And that's never true with a boss. Like you almost never, well, not, I wouldn't say never, depending on the level, but it's very rare that you would ever be able to use this against the boss. So you have a PvE nuker in wave content, or you have an arena nuker in a fight that might go multiple turns, this can be a good option. I choose this on Genbo because there are definitely times when I use him in a more defensive-based team or a go second team, and so I can get some value out of this skill there. Opportunist is the last option in this tier here, and this increases damage inflicted to targets with any CCs by 12%. So if you are using a setup team that incorporates a CC, like maybe you're using a Kaimar who has an AoE sleep, or you're using a Shiramani who has an AoE freeze, or you're using somebody with an AoE stun, this is going to allow you to do more damage to those champions that are under that debuff. This is a very popular mastery for those kinds of setup teams. So make sure that you pick this only if you have that kind of CC built into your composition. Otherwise, you're going to get no value. We are down to tier 5 here. In tier 5, the first methodical is okay. You could use that in the arena, but this tends to be a PvE skill more commonly. Increases the damage inflicted by this champion's default skill by 2% each time it is used during the battle. Stacks across each round in a battle up to 10%. So this makes your A1 stronger. So if you're using a very defensive, tanky team, maybe with revivers, maybe with shielders or something like that, maybe even with counterattack, this can be okay if you have a good A1 on your nuker, but otherwise this is generally just used for PvE content. The second option is very good. This increases damage inflicted by 6% in the arena and 3% in all other locations for each enemy killed by this champion in battle. Stacks across each round in a battle up to 12%. So you can get more damage if you are killing champions. And then in the next, with your next attack, you'll get more damage. By the way, it doesn't matter if those champions are revived. So if you've killed 2 champions, you will have 12% additional damage, regardless of how many champions are actually alive on the enemy team. That being said, this is definitely more valuable on like second and third rounds. This is, if you're trying to one-shot a team, that's not necessarily, kill streak isn't necessarily the best choice. I think I picked this specifically because at the time what I was finding was, in a lot of cases, Genbo was nuking out an enemy team and killing like 2 or 3 of the enemy, but I was having trouble with tanky targets at the time, and so I chose kill streak. Now I could probably switch this mastery, but I don't really feel like paying the gems to switch the masteries a third time, so I'm just leaving this in. And it also gives a little bit more value in PvE content like faction crypts. Blood Shield is another option that you can have. This places a shield buff on this champion for 1 turn when this champion kills an enemy, excluding boss's minions. The value of the shield is equal to 15% of this champion's max HP, occurs once per turn. So this is another mastery that is good for an extended fight, but not necessarily good for one-shotting the enemy team. And I probably use this, again, I don't know exactly why, but I knew that I was going to the right here in the bottom tier, and so that's probably why I picked this. It also gives Genbo a little bit of extra survivability in long fights, which is not bad. Okay, finally, you could use Stoke to Fury. Increases damage inflicted by 4% for each debuff on this champion. Stacks up to 12%. This is especially useful for a go second team composition. So if you know that you're going second, you're probably going to have some debuffs on you, and you can get up to 12% extra damage if you have those debuffs on you. If you are going first, again, this is not something that is particularly useful. So I would typically use this on a go second team. We are finally at tier 6. This is the big tier. Now, options 1 and 3 here are generally used for PvE, and options 2 and 4 here are generally used for PvP. So your first PvP option tends to be the more popular one. This is Helm Smasher. This has a 50% chance of ignoring 25% of the target's defense. For skills that ignore defense, this 25% is in addition to the amount ignored by the skill. So let's say you have a skill that ignores 25% defense, and then you have the Savage set we were talking about that ignores 25% defense, and then you have Helm Smasher. You have a 50% chance of ignoring 75% of the enemy's defense. That's going to allow you to chew through defensive-based champions and tanks, and it's really going to increase your damage by a whole lot. This mastery is pretty much required for you to get the highest damage numbers you can possibly get. The one drawback is it only works 50% of the time. Okay, so it's less consistent than the other option, but it definitely increases your ceiling. It raises your ceiling, your damage ceiling, as high as you possibly can. The option that I've chosen for Genbo is the Flawless Execution, which just gives you a flat crit damage boost of 20%. This can't be mitigated. It can't miss. It's just extra 20% damage. So that's great. That's just flat extra damage. It is much more consistent than Helm Smasher, but it doesn't raise your damage ceiling as high. So you can choose whichever one that you think is going to work best with the nuker that you're building. And this is also true for PvE and PvP nukers. The other two options I'm going to go over very quickly. So if you're using War Master or if you are using Giant Slayer, that is generally for boss fights. So again, we make a distinction between wave content and like solo target content, and arena falls into wave content, right? Because you're always coming up against an entire enemy team, not just one giant boss. So I said before that 1 and 3 are PvE based and 2 and 4 are PvP based. And that's true, but I have to clarify also 2 and 4 can be PvE based if you're doing wave content. Okay, so we have covered stats, we have covered gear sets, we have covered masteries, we have even covered the distribution of stats, we've covered team compositions to some extent. The last thing to mention here is blessings. Many of you may not have blessings on your arena nuker, but it is a priority. You want to start looking for a good blessing on your arena nuker. Now, I like this particular blessing, which is Crushing Rend. I'm going to show you this one. I try to go with a blessing that increases my primary damage stat and crit damage. And you can see that as I progress through this, I'm going to get an additional 20% crit damage here. And I am also getting an increase in attack. So even if the actual effect of the blessing isn't perfect, my stats are in fact perfect for the nuker I've chosen. However, even if you have a defensive-based nuker, say, you would still get value potentially out of Crushing Rend, because when the attack goes up, that doesn't help, but you can still get value out of that increased crit damage at 4 stars, and the primary effect of the blessing can be beneficial. So the first hit in each round will ignore a percentage of the target's defense, so this will ignore 1% defense for every 50 levels. Now, in Arena, generally, the enemies are at level 60, so I'm only ignoring 1% defense, but it's the first nuke, right? This is a one-shot Arena nuker. I'm trying to get every advantage I can, so this is a decent blessing for this champion. You'll also notice if I can get all the way to 6 stars on this, I will get an additional attack, I'll get additional crit damage, but I'm also at that point will ignore 1% defense for every 10 levels. So at that point, I'm ignoring 6% of the target's defense, plus it's on every hit. So if the fight goes multiple turns, I will be able to ignore that 6% defense every single turn. Now, is this the perfect, blessing for your arena nuker? No, and I don't want to go through every blessing here, but what I will say is the first thing that you can look at is what is the primary stat bonus that you're going to get, because getting to 2 stars is pretty easy. So you want to see if you're going to get HP on your HP-based nuker or defense on your defense-based nuker. And then look for other ways to increase your damage, whether that's ignoring defense or decreasing defense or getting some other benefit that's important to your team composition. Okay, so now we've set up our Genbo the Dishonored. Let's go out there into the arena and actually use him. All right, so here we are in arena. You can see I am in gold 5. I am very comfortably in gold 5. I'm not trying to push for plat. I would have a lot of difficulty pushing for plat, but I can definitely camp out here in gold 5 very effectively with my Genbo and my team composition. So I'm going to pick a champion. I'm going to pick a team to fight against. One of the things that you need to get good at in order to progress in the arena is knowing what enemies to battle, right? You don't want to just challenge every single team out there. Your composition, whether you're a go first or a go second, depending on what nuker you have, whatever you are, your composition's only going to be good against particular teams. There are teams that are going to counter yours, and there are teams that your team will counter instead. So you want to pick the easiest battles that you can find. So like the freebies, like here, this person has put a very weak defense up, which is very friendly. So you can go ahead and kill that one pretty easily. But if you're looking at these other ones, it's like, okay, this has an Arbiter, this one has an Ultimate Death Knight, this one has a Lord Shazar, this one has a Mortu Macabre. Which ones do I want to pick? Which ones are my composition strong against? So I'm actually going to go ahead and choose this first one here. Now, if you look at this, I'm just going to run 3 champions today. I'm not going to run a fourth champion because I want to show you the basics of how this composition works around an attack-based nuker like Genbo. But you can see that they have a power advantage. If I put in a 4th champion, say I put in Mithrala, you can see I would be very close. So this is a very similar team to mine in terms of power. Now, running in a speed, running a go first team against another go first team, an Arbiter team against an Arbiter team, this is a bit of a toss-up. I don't know if my Arbiter is fast enough. If my Arbiter is slower than their Arbiter, they're going to go first and I'm going to lose this fight. So sometimes I might not pick an Arbiter versus Arbiter matchup. I'm hoping I'm fast enough here, and I think I might be, because what I found is my Arbiter is faster than about 75% of Arbiters in Gold 5. So I definitely think it's better than a 50-50 toss-up, especially with the team power that this player has. If this team power were like 300K and it was still the same team composition, I would avoid it because I'd be almost certain that their Arbiter was going to be faster, right? Because speed translates into team power. So I'm going to take this off auto and I'm going to jump into this fight, and we'll talk about the team composition and how it works as we go. Okay, so I did win the speed race. All right, that's a relief. So I can actually show you this team composition. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is their Arbiter has much more turn meter than my Genbo, right? So one of the things that I need to do here is I need to have champions that increase turn meter. Now, if you don't have an Arbiter, you can absolutely run a High Katoon as your speed lead in arena, and that will help you get very far. You can get into at least gold 1, if not maybe gold 3 or even gold 4 with a High Katoon as your speed lead. Because not only does she have a speed aura, but she also has a turn meter fill. And that's what we're really looking for with our fastest champion. So whoever your fastest champion is, you want that champion with turn meter fill. Now, Arbiter has a turn meter fill on her A3. It's a nice big one of 30%. And in addition, she's bringing an increased attack. So Genbo is an attack-based champion, so he's going to get more damage with an increased attack. If you have a defensive-based champion, try to bring somebody somewhere on the team who's going to bring an increased defense. Unfortunately, if you have an HP-based nuker, there is no increased HP buff. So the nice thing about that is you don't have to worry about bringing an additional buffer. You can just find another champion who works well in that team composition. So all right, I'm going to use the A3 here to fill everybody's turn meter and get that buff up. And now all of a sudden you'll notice that my 2 champions have passed their Arbiter in terms of turn meter fill. It looks like Genbo and their Arbiter are very close. A lot of their champions now have either a full bar or very close to a full bar. However, I've got a second turn meter fill champion here in Deacon Armstrong. So his A3 is going to give me another 15% turn meter. It's also going to decrease the enemy's turn meter. Now, the thing about affecting the enemy, even the enemy's turn meter, or if you're trying to drop a buff on them, is that requires accuracy. He has pretty good accuracy, so he should land this a couple of times at least. He may not land it on every champion, but the turn meter fill doesn't require accuracy. So my champions are getting turn meter fill regardless. This also grants an extra turn, which means he's going to get to go again, which is important in this team composition because he is also my debuffer. So I'm going to use the A3 here now. and he'll get a second turn. Now he's going to have a chance to drop decreased defense. I wish they would change the way this tooltip works. It says has an 80% chance of placing a decreased defense, but I've booked this skill out and it now has a 100% chance of dropping defense, but they don't update that here in the arena. I wish they would change that. One thing to consider with the debuff and also with the turn meter decrease that I just tried is that Deacon Armstrong is Spirit Affinity. So he has a chance of weak hitting against Magic Affinity. And the Foley over here, you can see, has the red arrow. That's telling me I'm weak affinity. So I may weak hit there. But as long as I have enough accuracy, I should land on the other three. Now, if they have a lot of resistance, they could resist, even though I'm not going to weak hit over there. So let's see how many we actually land the debuff on. Got everyone. That's excellent. I didn't weak hit against Foley, and nobody had high enough resist to prevent me from getting the decreased defense. So now with my increased attack and the drop defense that I have on the enemy, I'm going to hit very hard, but I still want to get Genbo's crit rate up to 100%. So I'm going to open with his A3 to get that buff. It actually gives me 2 buffs. It also gives me extra crit damage. And now I'm going to use my A2, which is my AoE nuke. Okay, and I should hopefully wipe out everybody. And there we go. Relatively easy win here in Gold 5 against a team that has an equal amount of power to what I have. But again, I had to win the speed race, and that was the most important thing. If I lost to their Arbiter, game over, I'm going to lose because they're going to do it to me exactly what I did to them. So if we look at my Great Hall, you can go in here and you can actually see your stats in Arena, and you can see this week I've only fought 16 times. I have won 15 out of those 16. Now, you shouldn't obsess over this win rate. It resets every time the arena resets. And even if you are winning at, say, a 40 or 50 or 60% rate, you shouldn't look at that and be like, I'm horrible at arena. But you do want to kind of consider it as a way to measure improvement. Have you built your arena nuker well? Well, if you're getting 40% win rate, you might want to look at your arena nuker. You might also want to look at your team composition, make sure you're setting up that arena nuker the right way. If you rebuild your arena nuker and your team composition, and then you start getting 60 or 70%, then you've improved. 70% might not be the goal, but it's certainly a lot better than 40%. Also, I think people obsess about this too much. If you're using more arena tokens, whatever your win rate is, you're going to be getting more medals, and that's going to allow you to improve your Great Hall faster. And the nice thing about improving your Great Hall faster is it helps you literally everywhere. So one of the things that you'll notice is like I have crit damage on every single affinity maxed out. I did that first. And one of the reasons I did that first is because this means every nuker that I have on my entire roster hits harder, right? Also over here on the right side, these are just flat bonuses that you get for being in the various tiers. So at Gold 5, I get 22% extra HP, attack, and defense on every champion. So literally every champion is stronger the higher you climb in Arena. So those are the benefits of going into Arena and actually performing well, which is why you want to build your Arena nuker as well as possible. Okay, so that is it. That is the full guide on how to build an Arena nuker. Again, just a reminder, your Arena nuker may have tactical differences, skill differences, cooldown differences, stat differences from Genbo the Dishonored here. So just use this as a starting point. Make sure to research your specific Arena nuker to find the best builds and team compositions for that champion. All right, that is it. That's the whole thing. So thanks for hanging out. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you found it entertaining, especially if you run Genbo. You may have seen how good he can be. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions about your specific nuker. So if you do not use Genbo and you're wondering, what tweaks you can make, what team compositions you could use with your specific nuker, definitely ask me. I don't know every single nuker in the game. Sometimes I know them simply because I come up against them a lot, and I have built other nukers for other accounts and also for 3v3 Arena. So I do have some knowledge about other nukers, and if you have a specific question, ask me, maybe I can help you out. All right, if you would, please drop a like or subscribe, or both. That would be fantastic. Also, consider joining our Discord. We just launched our Discord community, so we only have a few members, but we're hoping to grow quickly. So there should be a link in the description of this video, but also on the main page of my YouTube channel, you can find a link there as well. I hope to see you in our Discord soon, and I hope to see you in another video soon. Have a good day.